afternoon, good evening. We have people joining us here from all over the world today. So thank you so much for being here. And I can guarantee that you are in for an absolute treat. This is going to be an amazing session today. We are joined by two very, very talented researchers and academics, Dr. Cherly and Dr. Gauri Laud, coming to us from the University of Tasmania and from Murdoch University. So today we are going to hear all about well-being at the service systems level, rather than just thinking about well-being as something that's an individual's responsibility. We're going to hear about the collective nature of well-being. So I won't get too far into the topic because this is definitely something that Dr. Leo and Dr. Laud will be able to share so much more about than I am able to. But I just wanted to welcome everyone, to thank you all for coming today. And on behalf of the Best Centre and the QUT Business School, to open the session. And I will just ask Dr. Laud and Dr. Leo to come to the virtual stage, and I will stop sharing so that they may share their own slides. Thank you.
Just want to thank Kate very quickly for the introduction, and also the Best Centre for inviting us, so especially extending that to Rebecca Russell-Burnett and Amanda Beatson for thinking of us. We are very honoured to be able to present our work today. Let me just see if I can just share.
While Cheryl is sharing, I just want to thank you, the Best Centre, and Kate for that excellent introduction. No pressure at all. So thank you, and also Rebecca, thank you so much for giving us this platform to share this research. It's been a long journey for us through this process, and I let Cheryl start talking and doing the presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. Very long journey for the three of us, actually. It's one of the projects we all started to get to know each other. And it's been quite a few years since. And whether you believe it or not, there's two of them who actually hasn't met each other before face to face. So everything has just been virtual. And we've had a lot of fun across the years just working on this project. I'd just like to acknowledge our third colleague, Cindy Chow, on working on this project as well. Our presentation today will be on a conceptualization and measure of service system well-being. And basically what we'll be doing is we'll be introducing two separate studies, a qualitative study and a quantitative study that we've done for this piece of research. So our agenda for today, we'll look into a little bit of the relevance and opportunity first on what spark of interest in working on this topic. And we'll look a little bit into what's the purpose for each of this study with the qualitative study, and then the quantitative study that actually follows from it, as well as the methodology for both studies, the findings, and some overall implications. So I'll introduce the qualitative part. So, which really looks at how we came about starting off with this study in terms of its conceptualization. So we understand across a lot of different disciplines, services marketing, transformational consumer research, social marketing, that service ecosystems, they've got this potential to either create value for us or to actually destroy value as well. And there's a clear link in these improvements to our well-being. So overall, studies have been within these different disciplines of studies, there's increasing insights into wanting to understand what well-being is all about. So at this point in research, a lot of scholars have tended to really focus on individual well-being. So a lot of these measures that have been adopted tend to be more subjective measures or objective measures, and originating more from the positive psychology area. This focus on more on individuals have been, a little bit limiting. So there's more of a narrow focus. It's more about behaviors. It's more about characteristics on what contributes towards our well-being. And it's really much individually focused. So what this means is that there's a clear gap in research about how social structures and system characteristics are really considered. So do we acknowledge this broader context, this environmental context? Do we acknowledge social structural context in which individuals are actually nested within? There's a lot of these interdependencies between the environment, our relationships, and individuals as well. It's interrelated, it's interdependent, and it's very subjective in nature. Do we acknowledge this broader context in our well-being? So there's much research that needed to be understood on well-being being more of a collective phenomenon rather than our individuals' pursuit of well-being. So we also understand from, SD Logic's services literature, as well as more even the social marketing literature of French and Gordon, there's an increasing push towards systems thinking. And this approach towards really acknowledging, environmental influences on behaviors and facilitating well-being outcomes as well. To date, a lot of this literature tends to look at it in more as an analytical lens when we think a little bit more about systems thinking. A lot of it tends to be more conceptual. So there's little theorizing in terms of what are the domains when it comes to systems well-being, or do we actually empirically validate these domains? And we understand that these domains can also fall within, 3 different levels as well. Just looking at micro, meso, and macro, which Gauri will talk a little bit more into detail in her section. So we had our qualitative study. We started off with really thinking about wanting to develop a scale, but in the end, it started to be a little bit of a bigger study that emerged more into more of a qualitative research. We wanted to really start to think about, all right, how do we conceptualize collective well-being? So we call it service systems well-being. We went into looking into what are systems, how are they actually defined? So it's really about, within the SD services logic literature, it's really about this arrangement of resources. So you've got resources of people, technology, information connected to systems, and pretty much tied together by propositions. So the system uses their resources. There's a lot of integration of resources of others to improve its own as well as other circumstances. So we looked into defining service systems well-being, and it was a little bit of a lengthy process just going into the literature, coming out of the domains before we actually came about to really refine and define what it means when it comes to systems well-being. So we came about to really define systems well-being as the extent to which a system, individuals or collective, as a system, we evaluate the present conditions. Does it fulfill, its needs? Does it contribute to the betterment of itself and others within this overall system? So just going back into a little bit of how we came to, this definition, it started off with really, looking into individual well-being. So we understand that individuals may, pretty much seek eudaimonic or more hedonic well-being in different lives domains. And there may be other concepts that reflects individual well-being as well, where, welfare, it's about flourishing, it's about thriving. So a lot of these concepts are pretty much a reflection of individual well-being, and individuals actually derive this overall well-being from a sum of these various domains. And we tend to place a different emphasis on these various attainment of well-being in a particular domain. So when it came to more collective well-being, the literature actually talks a little bit more in terms of service dominant logic. When it comes to a system, it's about adaptability. It's a lot about survivability of a system through the service of others. collective self-efficacy, well-being can, when it comes to holistic well-being, more in the community research as well. It's about social inclusion. It's about social capital. There are studies in policy development, in national happiness studies. They use indices such as, citizens perceiving whether they have good health, they've got good access to community services, or how long do they actually live in terms of mortality statistics. So marketing studies, organizational studies also advocate for looking beyond just diets and interpersonal relationships to look at more interrelationships. So we understand that well-being has pretty much been studied for individuals, and it's also been studied to some extent more conceptually for collectives as well. And our next step was really, can we actually provide this more holistic view on developing more of a systems perspective to collective well-being. We came up with 10 different domains of collective well-being, which we term service system well-being, strategic well-being, governance well-being, leadership well-being, resource well-being, community well-being, social well-being, collaborative well-being, cultural well-being, existential and transformational. So it was a very lengthy process to actually come down to coming to derive the meaning and definitions of these well-being states. How we came about getting to it was really a reflection of the well-being literature. We went into the organizational behavioral literature, more in the community literature, to really think a little bit about what domains of well-being have pretty much been studied within these different streams. So I will come to give you a little bit more examples when it comes to our qualitative study to show a reflection of these various domains of well-being. So you can see that when it comes to our definition, it's a lot about what the system provides its actors to function well. So we assess whether, the system is actually well-functioning. Is it well-functioning in terms of opportunities and goals, for instance, when it comes to strategic well-being? Is it well-functioning when it comes to governance, well-functioning policies and procedures? Do we assess that, leadership is functioning well? Does it have leaders that function well to motivate us? Does it have well-functioning resources? Do we think there's a flow in resources and there's presence of resources to assess resource well-being? Do we assess that community well-being is actually doing good? So you can see that overall, when you look at these various domains coming together, if they are functioning really well and they are actually present, then you've got a flourishing system, basically. So we looked into a qual study, and basically it was a case study that we undertook of 19 in-depth interviews. We looked at both a retail setting and a public regional hospital that were based in Taiwan. We came up with these definitions first. So we had a structure that was a priori. Then we really start to organize the structure of these categorizations, more deductive to see how the quotes that were coming out really related to the categories. And then we look at more inductive reasoning to say, all right, can we start to revise and redefine some of these deductive quotes that we actually got? As I said, it was a study that we conducted in Taiwan. So we have two bilingual researchers. We translated it, and then we verified these findings from Mandarin Chinese to English, and we did this check. And within two researchers, we kind of interpreted these definitions and refined the evidence for each of these domains. And then we got a third researcher in to really try to establish the findings. So the questions were really broad. It's about, how do you see a well-functioning system? How do you perceive the system to be well-functioning? And that drove our interviews. So really, we look into So we looked into these two case studies. As you can see from our participants list, that our interview participants were really wide-ranging. They range from both external to the system and both internal to the system, and in different seniorities as well. Senior, middle management, frontline employees for both the retail setting and for the public hospital. So we also had some external stakeholders involved in there, where they've got people who are volunteers to the hospital, the regional hospital, and also patients were interviewed. And the senior management were pretty much for the retail setting, and middle management, lower management. We've got some frontline employees. We've got government officials that were involved as well in participating in our interviews, as well as external stakeholders such as customers. So when it came to just a little bit of background, when it came to the two case studies, the regional hospital, we're talking about a hospital of more than about 1,000 employees. It's a public hospital that really looks into more quality care of patients, and they had this broader aim of being more of a regional research center as well. And the convenience store, we're not looking at a retail setting that's small. The company has more than 3,000 locations in Taiwan. So very innovative a retailer as well, really looking into more technology usage and being able to accumulate a lot of points on these apps as well. So a very forward-looking case that we're really talking about. So this brings to mind our key findings. Strategic well-being. You can see that strategic well-being, when it supports its actors to pursue opportunities and goals, very clearly articulated. As you can see in the findings, we are a very well-developed regional hospital. Our aim is to be a medical center. To actually achieve this aim, we want to fulfill local and central governments, but they're very clear in where they're actually going to be. Governance well-being, when there's well-functioning central regulatory and administrative policies, then it's about this feeling we assess, right? Working here, I feel stable. Everyone here cares about safety. And in terms of the hospital, our current system is not bad at all. Employment, recruitment, the system is healthy, it's well established. You can establish this as things are really going well. Leadership well-being, there are leaders who actually motivate, who provide support, they act in very egalitarian ways, they provide sense of purpose, they guide behaviors. One of our leaders, he treats us as a buddy. Everything he does, ask me, I'll do it very quickly. The contrast to another leader, many requirements we want to satisfy, but that he doesn't tell us about the benefits. To me, it's very harmful, it's very commercial. So a commercial perspective put on a regional hospital. And when there is a sense of resource well-being, it may be that the computers may not be working. When I try to log in, it's very embarrassing, and operationally, it's very difficult to even retrieve a blood test report. Versus, having a lot of resources. Technological system is good. All the systems are pretty much well-functioning. We've got community well-being. When we look at community well-being, exists when the systems provide actors with these wider networks, a sense of belonging. So our hospital has a very well-developed community service program. There's a lot of reciprocity. The patients will return to the hospital if they're concerned. So they provide residents with health checks, and in return, the patients return. Cultural well-being, when a system actually provides very strong shared understanding of rules and practices and norms of exchanges. So cultural well-being, it's when you've got corporate retreats, for instance, improve emotional connections and benefits. Some physicians have really bad tempers. When we attend corporate retreats, it helps us to understand them better. And there's a lot more familiarity following these corporate retreats. The company have a sports meet, family day, departmental travel benefits. So you get to know people, you get to know others as well. So cultural well-being has a lot of emotional benefits as well. It tends to aid these interconnections. Social well-being, the system provides social connections, this affective bonding, mutual bonding. I was assigned to this division without my consultation by the leader. So I don't like the work, but colleagues from the division chats with me. Whenever she sees me too busy, she makes me a cup of tea that warms my heart. So you can see that although there was a good visit in leadership well-being, other domains have this compensatory effect on it, where social well-being really comes out very strongly here. And collaborative well-being, there's well-functioning relationships within the service system. So I personally feel the training of physicians, so very diverse language that's being used. The training of physicians tend to be very idealistic. So when we try to communicate with them, they've got their own opinions, they don't take our advice. And when we talk a little bit about the retail organization, the department that took our project is the planning division. They need to work with internally, procurement, legal, finance, marketing. But this feeling good, I feel that things are good here. So I feel good working with the company because their internal collaboration, it's not bad. Existential well-being. It exists when actors within the system has a very strong purpose that's congruent with their aspirations and values. So participant G talks a little bit about, I feel nothing like a professional. I merely press a button that shows a number for people to be called into the room. There's very little sense of accomplishment at all. So there's no clear purpose here. Just think a little bit in terms of the next quote, where you've got a retail company that promotes their app. So there's an app that encourages to collect points, reward points. And if you've got any odd coins, then they can donate these points towards a donation of food. The company would do that, and other charity groups as well. So I'm very driven to do something which is really good. So the system provides a very clear purpose in creating social impact. So here, the actors are really willing to contribute to the improvement of the overall system. And then finally, transformative well-being. It reflects actors being opportunities to train, to grow through learning. So there's growth through psychological needs such as competency. The hospital, we're given education, we're given training. You can check for information on external websites. The head of nursing will publicize our programs. And likewise, in the retail setting, we offer educational training, we nurture talent. We encourage our employees to initiate new projects and be initiators. So as you can see across our 10 domains, we came up with some various broader propositions. One, we're saying that really your institutional, more of your macro level, gives rise to institutional domains of your strategic, your governance, your architecture in terms of your leadership as well, and your resources. So when there's resource planning at this macro level, you've got flourishing macro level. Your network exchanges, your network level domains may emerge when you've got actors who participate in this network of exchanges. So when they participate in this network exchange, it gives rise to well-being in the form of community, social, collaborative, and cultural. And finally, at the micro level, if there's personal enrichment, there's this sense of purpose, there's self-realization, people are more enriched, then it gives rise to existential well-being and transformative well-being. And of course, we look at some of these interrelationships. We also propose that, top up, top to bottom, bottom to top, there might be some linkages in there. So take, for instance, if there's lack of resource well-being at the institutional level, it may also influence how people interact through your network patterns or your lack of learning opportunities, which is like transformative well-being. And likewise, between the domains, there may be a flow as well. So transformative well-being, if you've got learning opportunities, you might also have this stronger sense of purpose. So that's what we pretty much derive, at least from a conceptual level, of our 10 domains and interlinkages. And overall, through our conceptualization, we showed these key domains of service system well-being through our 10 domains. And hedonic, whether it's pretty much hedonic and eudaimonic interpretations of well-being, we established that actually they do also at the system level, they can also exist. And specific domains, they might manifest in specific sectors and different actors as well. So take, for instance, strategic well-being. When we talk to some of these participants, the stakeholders who could really clearly articulate that it was present was more people at more of a senior level. And then we acknowledge that these well-being actually emerges. So we look at these interrelationships when actors and collectives actually interact dynamically. And overall, there's this flow to say that service system well-being, people try to achieve this balance in service system well-being to meet their needs across different domains. But sometimes there are compensatory roles as well. I mean, we think about ourselves being situated in particular systems, may it be our organization, our communities. We tend to assess, we might have certain domains that are stronger, that might make up for certain deficits that are in place that might provide us with what we actually need. So with that, that brings me to my part in service system well-being and a conceptualization for our paper. And I'll pass on to Gauri to talk about the second part of the study.
Cheryl, do you mind just keeping your slides and managing them for me?
Okay, Ken.
Thank you, Cheryl. Sorry, my other laptop just crashed. So hence I'm requesting Cheryl to do that. Thank you, Cheryl. So moving on to the journey of our next study, and that was the quantitative phase. Look, there was always a plan to get into this phase of quantitative and try and develop a scale. And the plan was specifically because, as Cheryl pointed out, in the literature, as service marketers, whether or TCR, consumer research, there is dialogue that we need to look at collective well-beings, but it has always been a dialogue at a conceptual and a theoretical level. However, when we talk about collective well-being, we really don't know how to measure it. What exactly is collective well-being and how exactly to measure and assess that collective well-being. With the success and the confidence that we gain with our conceptual piece, and when we were able to actually identify those 10 domains, we sort of like, let's have a look on, and then embark on a journey of, can we develop a scale, a tool that could actually be applied by other researchers, in whether they are TCR researchers doing empirical work, social marketing researchers, or public health policy. So something that is very generalizable, and I'll show you how the scale can be used across all different domains of research and practice. So this particular study, Cheryl, next slide, thanks. So this particular study is obviously the next step in the process. So we stick to our original definition of what exactly a service system is. And it is defined as the extent to which a system includes individuals and collectives and evaluates its present condition in fulfilling its need and contributing to the betterment of itself and the others in the system. What I want the audience to note here, and Cheryl also pointed this out, is there was assessment of the status quo. What is the present well-being status quo, and how, as an individual, we as an individual, as a part of an ecosystem, whether you're a part of a university or an organization or a health system or any sort of thing, how do you evaluate the current status quo? So that was our starting point here. Next, Cheryl. So by the time we published our first study, a conceptual study, I think there were at least 2 or 3 studies that actually happening in parallel. If I'm not mistaken, it was Professor Frau's study that was looking as, I think both the Professor Frau's study and our study sort of got published at the same time, isn't it, Cheryl? Where they looked at, again, establishing what collective service ecosystem was. And then followed by that, there was, I think, York's study on safe co-creation spheres. So they were building on what we were establishing. And these were some parallel study that gave us more confidence on understanding, yes, collective well-being exists and collective well-being needs to be measured. All these 3 studies were saying the same thing in different ways. We took a more domain-oriented perspective because we thought if there was a scale in future, then a domain-oriented perspective gave us much more robust way to assess and develop that scale. So we went down the domain-oriented perspective. If you look at the Frau et al. Study, theirs is a case study, and it's again a conceptualization of collective well-being. However, a deeper look in that study, you will notice that their vantage point of analysis comes from that meso level, exactly the level that we take in. So all these 3 studies were building on each other. But what was not occurring was that there was a collective level, there are domains, and yes, there are interconnections. However, there were levels in between that needed to be operationalized for a scale to develop. So again, there was this theoretical gap on what are these levels and how these levels can be operationalized. Now, those who are aware with value co-creation, TSR literature, SD logic literature, we all know that we've been talking about, the micro, meso, and macro level. And these are levels of aggregation, or but more abstract and at a very theoretically grounded levels. So yeah, they are in place, and we also believe, and we also establish that in our theory paper, that there are micro, meso levels, and each of these domains had specific place within each of these levels. As Cheryl showed in that last figure, where there were interconnections and why we thought a particular domain, such as transformational domain or the existential domain, was more actor centric. So that was there, and everybody, and you will see in the paper that we make an argument how the other 2 studies also establish a similar idea. But operationalizing of these levels was absolutely required. And we embarked on this journey for doing that. Cheryl, next slide. So both in our conceptual piece and also in this piece, we focused on multi-level theorization, again, where multi-level theorization theorizes the notion of collective well-being as a multi-level phenomenon. And we had established that, so Frau's study had established that. And it was all about the interactions that was happening between the nested actors and how they integrated the resources and actually created that well-being for themselves, but in that process also created well-being for the system itself. So next. Those of you are interested in multi-level theorization, there is an extensive discussion that we do in this process in our paper 1. So if you are after that, please have a look at that. That is our conceptual paper. So please have a look at that. So coming back to micro, meso, and macro level operationalizing, we went back to the literature, because clearly there's so much already said about these levels. We looked at the service marketing literature, social marketing literature, economics literature. We looked at policy literature, health literature, and what we did is we dived dived into looking at how exactly these levels are defined by these studies. Each of the study obviously had a different context, and hence looked at different and had different definitions of macro, meso, and micro. And we started coming out with some of the commonalities in these definitions, that what exactly they are talking about. One step before was, again, if you look at the Coleman bathtub model, which also talks about how social structures are formed. Again, a theoretical model that precisely says how micro, meso, and macro level actually talk to each other and are interrelated. So that was also the background aspect of it. But from a definitional perspective, we found there are commonalities. So for example, one of the commonality at micro level was micro level. A lot of studies spoke about dyadic relationships, individual relationships, relationships that were about a micro level was about how actors felt, that is individuals felt, what individuals did in terms of integrating and accessing resources. So there was these frames of, micro level relationship based on quality, based on the resources and things like that. So that was micro, very, very actor centric, personal centric. Then at a meso level, the focus was on groups, and you can look at all the definitions that we provide in the paper. The focus is on how group decisions happen, group behaviors happen, what are the belief systems at group level, what are the exchange frames of exchange mechanisms at group level. So that happened at a meso level. And at a macro level, what usually the commonality is about, what are the institutional frameworks that are available in a way that offer guidance to these nested actors, either to be reflexive in their exchanges or draw their belief systems and norms from these macro level guidance. So whether it's leadership or you're looking at, the governance structures, they actually provided that background framework of how to operate. Now, those of you are familiar with sociology and theories around structuration would already know this, that how these levels actually inform these behaviors. So these were the general things in the literature. Cheryl, next, thanks. And we concluded from the literature the definitions of micro level well-being, meso level well-being, and macro level well-being. So, and by doing that, micro level well-being was more about reflects a collective sense of personal functioning. How do I, as an individual, function? And that emerges when actor is assessing a service system, whether a particular service system is meeting my personal needs in terms of existential. Cheryl, can you go to the next slide where we provide all the definitions so that I can relate it back? Thanks. So if that was the case, now this was in existential. And if you look at existential is whether a particular service system is providing me a sense of purpose. If it is, then yes, it is more beneficial to me. And whether the service system is providing me opportunities to learn and apply, again, that is towards the development. So very, very actor-centric approach. Then at meso level, the definition was sense of collaboration and relational interfunctioning. I said meso level most was driven and inspired by the fact of group behaviors and group relationships. And that's why social, communal, and collaborative domains actually were sitting within that meso level. And at macro level, as I was saying, that whether a sense of institutional functioning is the institutional frameworks or institutional logics that exist in any service ecosystem or ecosystem, are they working? What are the governance structures? Is the leadership working? Are there enough resources? And hence all these four domains actually sat at macro level in itself. So can you go to the next slide? Next slide. No, sorry. So that's where, yep, thanks. So that's where it all ended when it come to conceptualizing, and obviously then the struggle started with collecting data and trying to establish a scale. Now we actually did a some couple of slides from here on will be very technical, but I'll try and simplify it because these are scale development procedures that we followed. So we followed standard scale development procedures, and scale development procedures basically focused on guidelines from Develis and Netmer et al. 2023. So there are 4 stages that we followed. The stage 1 was item generation and evaluation. Again, going back to the literature, looking at the literature, we actually looked at we developed a pool of items, item to the definition that it corresponds to, and then we sent it out to 7 experts in management and services marketing. All of these experts worked in the well-being area. In fact, rather, our management experts worked in the worked specifically in positive psychology and organizational psychology and organizational behavior. And we went through a couple of rounds with them in terms of expert reviews for conciseness, clarity, and reflectiveness of items. We took their feedback on board. So we started off from the literature with 77 items, but through the process of expert reviews, we finalized a pool of 59 items to move to the next stage. Now, in the study 1, our task was, which was called as initial purification. We conducted a survey. We sent out, I think, 1,000 or 1,500 surveys, and so we had data points back around 425 in context of retailing, hospitality, education. And in this particular phase, what happened was we conducted an EFA, and that is your exploratory factor analysis, common factor analysis, and using all the possible Wehrmacht's rotation, etc. We uncovered the dimensions. All the KMOs and the Bartlett test of sphericity were appropriate, following which we did. What we found was in the EFA, one of the domain, that is a cultural well-being domain, fell out, and we were not able to validate that particular domain. And I'll talk to about why that could be the case later on. But moving on from there, we analyze each component individually, assessed its psychometric properties and unidimensionality. So we go through the whole process of scale development in the paper. Most of our Cronbach alpha values were led to elimination of more factors. So from the pool of 59, we ended up with a pool of 46 items, reflecting the dimensions that excluded, mind you, the cultural well-being values. Then we moved on to the next stage of scale validation. We had to validate these scales. So what happened was, Cheryl, could you go to the next slide? I just want to, not this one, the next one. The next slide from, yeah, we finishes the next, where we have items. I just want to talk about the items more. Yeah, this one, thanks. So what you see in front of you are a total pool of 46 items, which were modeled of SSW and was tested using CFA validation and of dimensional structure of CFA. And you will notice that if you look at the way the items are designed, they are designed for generalizability purposes. So each item, and these are the final, these were the items that we used. Sorry, Cheryl, can you go back in that process? To the figure now, sorry. Yeah, thanks. So these were, So if you look at the dimensions, the nine, we started with the 10 dimensions, then we ended up with these 9 dimensions. What we actually, what we could conclude from there in terms of specification of the model, that yes, it is a multi-dimensional third order formative construct that composes of micro level, meso level, and macro level well-being. Now the construct consists of reflective and formative. So reflective was more of the first order domains, and then the proposed specification, the first order dimensions. And so what we say is that the actors experience stronger micro level well-being, meso level well-being, and macro level well-being, and then there is a scaffolding approach to that. As a result, micro level, meso level, and macro level well-being become formative constructs, and then there is a detailed discussion in the paper about this. So it's basically, unless and until an individual is safe for performing, so one needs to assess micro level well-being, one needs to start assessing their existential level and transformational level, is what we are saying. And then micro level then determines the SSW. Same goes with, to assess meso level well-being, one needs to determine their collaborative, community, and social well-being. So that's what it means. Now, this specification highlights basically the direction and flow to the SSW constructs. And from those of who are aware of the Jarvis, this can be called as a type 2 model, the third order reflective formative. Again, there is a lot of discussion about how we do this in the paper. Cheryl, to stage 4, that is your hypothesis testing. Thanks. So once we did scale validation, complete scale validation, we moved on to the hypothesis testing, that is, stage 4, that is measurement, application, and hypothesis testing. Could you go to the item slide again? Yeah. To the hypothesis slide again, not the item slide again. So there were 2 hypotheses that, so there is a requirement of nomological validity to assess whether this scale actually, is good enough. So we did that by including, by developing a nomological model, by suggesting that service system well-being can actually impact individual well-being. The inspiration for this particular hypothesis, it comes from our conceptual piece and argument and theory that indeed collective level well-being is absolutely important for individual well-being, to the extent that collective well-being actually provides a framework and direction to understand whether the resources are available in the system, and resulting in a shared understanding that actors can actually have the power and the autonomy to be able to ensure that they have individual well-being. So it's very simple. SSW actually relates positively to life satisfaction, but it was very crucial as well to establish that link from the theoretical perspective, that there is a connection between individual and collective well-being. So that was the first. And the second one was service system research, again reinforces, service actors interaction, because they are nested within the larger institutional structure. Value outcomes are very important. Now, because this is a services marketing study, we had focused on customer orientation as one of the outcomes, and we wanted to see that if there is a collective well-being, say in an organization, in a retail organization, or in a hospital setting, will that impact how they interact with the customer, and what could be, because there needs to be some form of service system or organizational level performance outcome to assess whether collective well-being makes sense and actually contributes to something meaningful and positive for the organization or the service system in itself. And hence that was SSW relates positively to customer orientation. So that was the one. Then next one. So what we did was, since we collected the study, we used the data, and in the first step we established the discriminant validity without the two outcome variables. So outcome variables to ensure all that we are again to ensure our everything was discriminant and for the robustness purposes. The next stage involved testing through mostly the next stage involved testing for discriminant validity of SSW dimensions through comparison of shared variances between pairs of construct. And then we found that all the average variance and everything that is the normal standard thing were good enough. But then in terms of to identify the second order, that is your micro, meso and macro level, and how we followed, because remember that was formative, and we use MOS in the case of MOS in the case of our reflective, that is our first order, but we went into PLS to do the work for our formative construct. And we found that we used repeat product indicator approach there, and we were able to see that through that process the whole model held true, and we were able to establish that connection. Now then we ran a standard structural model, and by adding those two outcome variables, one was life satisfaction and customer orientation, and it was holding true. So that's your next slide. I'm almost on the yeah, the next one. Yep. So as you can see, the R-square values and the customer orientation and life satisfaction were pretty neat. Next. So that was the scale. It is indeed a multidimensional scale. It allows us to look at different domains at different levels. From a theoretical perspective, I think this is the first paper that actually takes that step forward in terms of validation of what really is service system well-being, and contribute to that establishment of collective level well-being. But mind you that we started off with 10 domains, but as I said, cultural well-being was something that we could not validate, and we resulted only in 9 domains. The possible explanation that we found in the literature, and then through our reflection process as well, is that culture in itself is such an omnipresent property across an organization. It is in our minds, it needs to be shared, it needs to be enacted collectively, and it is in the collective. And hence we were not able to we tried a couple of times, I think, with one of the database itself, but we were not, because that culture in itself, it was so shared understanding, and because it required shared building up process, that one of the domain was not being validated. So that is one of the reason. The other thing that we do is we show clearly now through empirical work that service system well-being is clearly a hierarchical structure. It uses a third order formative construct with three formative second order dimensions. And then this allows us to establish that aggregation process and scaffolding process that we to date were only believing was conceptual. Conceptually we believe that this happened, but now there is an empirical work and a scale that we can use to do that. And SSW impacts life satisfaction and customer orientation. As I said, it's clear that any collective well-being is absolutely required for an individual to feel well. a recent Gallup survey suggests that apparently they conducted a Gallup survey across multiple countries. And at the moment, given what's happening in our world, COVID, pandemic, war, heaps of stuff, we are unhappy bunch of people because that's how we feel. But what this basically tells us is that it is the collective and how we feel, how what we see and what happens around us and how we enact together actually impacts our individual well-being. So again, that's that empirical link that has been established there. Again, from a theory perspective, I think Anderson's work, Ostrom's work, a lot of my fellow colleagues, service researchers and social marketing researchers have done a lot of work in establishing, how how collective well-being is an important aspect to any form of intervention strategies or even designing transformative service value proposition. So then next one is basically practical implication. Personally, I see the use of this tool happening in TSR, social marketing, organizational resilience, health policy, and community studies. This is a benchmarking tool because it gives importance. It allows anyone, any organization to conduct a survey, use this tool, conduct a survey within the organization, within a community of people to assess what exactly is basic, what exactly is the status quo of the current well-being. So it allows us to identify what are the gaps in the well-being and what then can develop intervention strategies to do that. The tool is versatile enough. As I said, first, if you look at the design of the items, we have made them so, we have designed them in a way that anybody wanting to use them don't have to actually work on tweaking them a lot, can be adapted to any context. And I think Cheryl will agree, we went through extensive discussions for that throughout the process. But depending on the need, systems can be used a scaffolding approach to build and evaluate SSW, whether it's a top-down model, that is, you look at from assessing only assessing either starting from the strategic well-being or leadership well-being or resource well-being, or whether it is a lateral, whether you're a small to medium enterprise or say a Silicon Valley for that matter, and looking at how groups of people or communities can work together and things like that, or a bottom-up approach. So it's literally that. And the scale can also be used to measure system-related influences such as health, environmental, behavioral change. So that's lots that the scale is indeed very versatile if anyone wants to use it to assess, even like in social marketing, as I said, to assess the impact of the intervention programs. So I think that brings end to my presentation. This is the last slide. Oh no, we do have future study, sorry. So this is the last slide, and a future study, look, we adapted one type of skill development approach, which was quite popularly is adopted in marketing. But definitely there are other forms of skill development approaches. One of them is looking at aggregated SSW index and assigning weightings and dimensions and actually trying to profile people within a service system using this. So that can be done as a work of future study. The other one is looking at, again, as I said, we looked at the current status quo, but you could ask questions about aspirational, what exactly an aspirational resource well-being looks like for you, or what exactly an aspirational, transformational well-being looks like for. So this is a very promising area that could be a part of somebody's future work. And other individual outcomes, again, as I said, it was quite a mammoth task to undertake in terms of building the scale up. So, but definitely there are opportunities to assess what are the different antecedents and outcomes, for SSW, and could be tested in different contexts. Next. Yep, that's it. So this is the paper. Anyone interested in skill development procedures, multi-level theorizing, or otherwise looking at our items, adapting, please go ahead and use this paper. That's it. Thank you.